Welcome to the dark reality of the 1990s. They were the golden gods of the era, worshipped by millions and plastered on every teenage bedroom wall. Yet they all died alone on dirty sidewalks and in silent hallways before they turned 30. It is a grotesque paradox. River Phoenix, the clean-living vegan saint, died with a lethal speedball in his veins. Jonathan Brandis, the perfect teen idol, hanged himself the moment the applause stopped. And Brad Renfro, the Disney discovery, rotted into a junky punchline while the industry laughed. This isn't just a tragedy of 3 wasted lives. It is the autopsy of a predatory Hollywood machine that harvested their youth, sold us their innocence, and then ruthlessly discarded their bodies the moment they broke. River Phoenix was never just an actor to his fans. He was a belief system. He was a cause. Born River Jude Bottom on a peppermint farm in Oregon, his very existence was mythologized from the start. His parents were members of the Children of God, a controversial religious cult that preached a distorted version of free love and apocalyptic salvation. River's early childhood was not spent in acting classes or on playgrounds. It was spent on the dusty street corners of Caracas, Venezuela, singing for loose change to feed his family. He wasn't a child. He was a provider. At 5 years old, he was already carrying the weight of his family's survival on his shoulders. He later recalled losing his virginity at age 4 to other children in the cult, a horrific admission that he would later try to walk back as he navigated the PR minefields of Hollywood, but which hinted at a foundational trauma that never truly healed. When the family finally broke away from the cult and landed in Los Angeles, they changed their name from Bottom to Phoenix, symbolizing a rise from the ashes. But for River, the ashes never really washed off. By the late 80s and early 90s, River Phoenix was the golden standard. He was the vegan James Dean. While his peers were buying Ferraris and trashing hotel rooms, River was buying rainforests in Costa Rica to protect them from logging. He spoke about animal rights before it was trendy. He railed against corporate greed. He was beautiful, yes, with that jagged blonde hair and those piercing, empathetic eyes, but he was also good. That was the trap. Hollywood cast him as the moral compass of his generation. In movies like Stand By Me, Running on Empty, and My Own Private Idaho, he played characters that were wounded, sensitive, and searching for redemption. The line between River the person and River the character began to blur. The audience demanded that he be the saint he played on screen. Ethan Hawke, his co-star in Explorers, later noted with chilling insight, "We all wanted to be famous. River wanted to save the world." But saving the world is a heavy cross to bear for a 23-year-old who is secretly crumbling inside. By 1993, the dissonance between River's public image and his private reality had become a deafening roar in his head. To the press, he was the clean-living militant vegan who wouldn't even wear leather belts. To the underground scene of LA, he was spiraling. He hated the fame. He famously said, "I wish I could just walk away and live on a farm somewhere, but I have to work. I have to support everyone." He was the financial engine of the Phoenix clan. If he stopped acting, the money stopped. The rainforest preservation stopped. The band equipment stopped. He was imprisoned by the very stardom he loathed. This pressure cooker created a classic Jekyll and Hyde dynamic. River began to lead a double life. During the day, he was the articulate, polite activist giving interviews about the ozone layer. At night, he was diving headfirst into the darker corners of the LA music scene. He found solace in music, forming the band Alika's Attic. But the music scene in the early 90s was awash in a specific kind of poison. It wasn't the party drugs of the disco era. It was heroin and cocaine, often mixed. River, the boy who wouldn't eat meat because it hurt animals, began poisoning his own body to numb the pain of his existence. He wasn't an addict in the traditional sense of a daily user who couldn't function. He was a binge user. He would stay clean for weeks while filming, maintaining his temple. And then, when the pressure became too much, he would obliterate himself. These binges were acts of rebellion against his own saintly image. It was as if he was trying to scream, "Look at me. I am not a god. I'm a messed up kid." But nobody wanted to hear that. They needed the saint. October 30th, 1993, a Saturday night. The air in Los Angeles was thick with the Santa Ana winds, what the locals call earthquake weather. River had just returned to L.A. from a grueling shoot in Utah for the film Dark Blood. He was exhausted. His hair was dyed a dark, muddy brown for the role, stripping away his signature golden halo. He was looking forward to a night out. He was supposed to play music. His destination was the Viper Room, a small, dark, exclusive club on the Sunset Strip co-owned by Johnny Depp. The Viper Room was the it place for the young Hollywood elite. It was a windowless black box where stars could go to escape the prying eyes of the paparazzi. It was supposed to be a safe haven. River arrived with his girlfriend, actress Samantha Mathis, and his siblings Joaquin, then 19, and Rain, then 20. He had a guitar case with him. He was under the impression that he was going to perform on stage with his friend Flea, the bassist from the Red Hot Chili Peppers, and perhaps jamming with Depp's band, P12AM. The club was packed. It was Halloween weekend, and the atmosphere was chaotic. River moved through the crowd, but something was wrong. According to eyewitnesses, he looked jittery, unmoored. He was told upon arrival that the stage was too full. He wouldn't be playing that night. For River, music was his only true release, his only way to communicate who he really was. Being denied the stage was a crushing blow. He felt small. He felt like just an actor again. 12:30 a.m. Disappointed and restless, River retreated to the shadows of the club. It was here, in the dimly lit corners, that he encountered a group of musicians and dealers. The exact sequence of what happened next has been debated for decades, but the toxicology report tells the undeniable truth. Someone handed River a drink, or perhaps he asked for it. It was a cup of liquid, but it wasn't alcohol. It was a dissolved speedball, a mixture of high-grade Persian brown heroin and cocaine. A speedball is a chemical tug-of-war. The cocaine acts as a supercharger for the heart, sending it racing, while the heroin acts as a depressant, telling the lungs to stop breathing. It is a lethal roller coaster that confuses the central nervous system to the point of collapse. River, already compromised and likely having consumed other substances earlier, downed the mixture. 12:45 a.m. Samantha Mathis later recalled in a heartbreaking interview that she knew something was wrong the moment he came back to their table. He was sweating profusely. His knuckles were white. He was agitated, getting into a scuffle with another man in the club. Mathis, sensing the danger, tried to get him to leave. "I think I'm overdosing," River whispered to a friend, but instead of calling an ambulance immediately, the terrifying logic of celebrity addiction took over. Don't make a scene. Don't ruin the reputation. Just get him air. They tried to walk him out. 1 a.m., October 31st, 1993. River Phoenix stumbled out of the front door of the Viper Room and onto the cold concrete of Sunset Boulevard. The fresh air didn't help. The speedball had already hijacked his brainstem. He collapsed. It wasn't a peaceful fainting spell. It was violent. River began to seize uncontrollably. His body thrashed against the pavement, his head hitting the concrete. Joaquin Phoenix, the 19-year-old younger brother, watched in horror. This was his big brother, his protector, the invincible River. Joaquin scrambled to a payphone. This was before cell phones were ubiquitous, and dialed 911. That call is one of the most haunting pieces of audio in Hollywood history. You can hear the terror in Joaquin's voice, a teenager watching his world end. "Please come. He's dying. Please," Joaquin screams. "Is he breathing?" the dispatcher asks. "He's not breathing. He's twitching. Please come." Inside the club, the music played on. Johnny Depp was on stage singing a song called Michael Stipe. The lyrics, in a grim twist of fate, included the line, "But we didn't have the money to buy a better one." He had no idea that his friend was dying, just on the other side of the wall. Rain Phoenix, River's sister, threw herself over his body to stop him from injuring himself during the seizures. She later said she tried to give him mouth-to-mouth, but his jaw was locked shut. She sat on the dirty sidewalk, cradling his head in her lap, whispering to him to stay. But River was already gone. The seizures stopped. He went still. His face, usually so animated and full of light, turned a bluish gray. 1:14 a.m. The paramedics arrived. They found a young male in full cardiac arrest. No pulse, no blood pressure. They loaded him into the ambulance, rushing him to Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, but it was a race they had already lost. 1:51 a.m. River Phoenix was pronounced dead. He was 23 years old. The death of River Phoenix was a nuclear event. It didn't just break hearts, it broke the illusion. If River, the vegan, the environmentalist, the clean one, could die of a heroin overdose on a sidewalk, then no one was safe. The narrative of the innocent star was shattered forever. But the media, true to its parasitic nature, didn't mourn him. They feasted. In the days following his death, the Phoenix family retreated to Florida to bury their son in privacy. They wanted a closed casket. They wanted to remember him as the beautiful boy he was, not the blue autopsy-scarred body he had become. Enter the National Enquirer. A freelance reporter broke into the funeral home in Florida the night before the service. He rearranged the body in the casket to get a better angle and snapped a photo. The next day, that photo was on the cover of the tabloid at every supermarket checkout in America. The headline screamed, "River Phoenix in his coffin." It was a final devastating violation. The world stared at the waxen, lifeless face of their idol. It was grotesque. It was a message from the industry to every young dreamer. We own you. We own your talent. We own your image. And we even own your corpse. River's death signaled the end of innocence for 90s Hollywood. But he was only the first domino. His death created a vacuum, a river-shaped hole in the industry. Casting directors were frantic. They needed a replacement. They needed a new blonde, blue-eyed boy to fill the void, to take the roles River could no longer play. They looked around, desperate for fresh meat, and their hungry eyes landed on a kid with a bright smile and a fragile heart. They found Jonathan Brandis. If River Phoenix was the James Dean of the 90s, brooding, intense, and tragic, Jonathan Brandis was designed to be the boy next door. He was safe. He was clean. He was the kind of boy you could bring home to your mother, the kind of boy who would carry your books and never break your heart. But Hollywood didn't understand that by stripping away the danger, they weren't protecting the boy. They were dehumanizing him. They were turning a human being into a commodity, a face on a lunchbox, a disposable idol whose shelf life was ticking down from the moment he signed his first contract. Jonathan Brandis was the boy who did everything right, who followed every rule, and was destroyed not by his vices, but by his obedience to a system that threw him away the moment he grew up. Jonathan's rise was not an accident. It was a masterclass in manufacturing fame. He didn't emerge from the gritty streets or an obscure art house theater. He came from the world of commercials and soap operas. He was a professional child. By the time he was 10, he had starred in over 80 commercials. He knew how to hit his mark, how to smile on cue, and how to sell products. His big break came with the never-ending story 2, The Next Chapter, 1990. The film itself was a critical flop, a pale shadow of the beloved original. But for Jonathan, it was the launch pad. At 14 years old, he was the lead. He was the hero. He was the face on the poster. Then came the role that would etch him into the nightmares and dreams of an entire generation, Bill Denbrough in Stephen King's It, 1990. In the miniseries, amidst a cast of talented child actors, Jonathan stood out. He played the stuttering leader of the Losers Club with a vulnerability that was heartbreaking. When his character cried over the death of his brother Georgie, the audience cried with him. He wasn't just acting, he was channeling a deep, innate sensitivity. He possessed a rare quality, empathy. You looked at Jonathan Brandis and you felt like he understood you. That empathy became his currency. By 1993, as River Phoenix was spiraling into the darkness of the Viper Room, Jonathan Brandis was ascending to the stratosphere of teen idol status. He was cast in Ladybugs, 1992, and Sidekicks, 1992. These were not Oscar-worthy films. They were light, fluffy commercial vehicles designed to capitalize on his face. And it worked. He became the king of the teen magazines. Bop, Tiger Beat, 16 Magazine. You couldn't walk past a newsstand in America without seeing Jonathan's face. He received 4,000 fan letters a week. Girls camped out on his lawn. He had to be escorted by security through malls because the screaming mobs would try to tear his clothes off. He was 16 years old, and he was completely alone in the center of the storm. The pinnacle of Jonathan's career and the beginning of his end was Sequest DSV, 1993 to 1996. This was supposed to be the big league. Produced by Steven Spielberg, Sequest was marketed as Star Trek Underwater. It was a massive budget, primetime science fiction series. Jonathan was cast as Lucas Wolinchak, the brilliant teenage computer prodigy. On the surface, it looked like a dream job. He was a main cast member on a Spielberg show. He was making huge money. He was an international superstar. But behind the scenes, Sequest was a gilded cage. The show was plagued by creative turmoil, constantly changing showrunners and direction. But the one constant mandated by the network, NBC, was Jonathan Brandis. Why? Because he brought in the teenage girl demographic. The writers were ordered to focus on Lucas. They wrote episodes where Lucas saved the day, where Lucas fell in love, where Lucas was the hero. The veteran actors on the show, including the legendary Roy Scheider, reportedly grew resentful of the attention lavished on the teen heartthrob. Jonathan felt this tension. He wasn't just a kid having fun anymore. He was a corporate asset. The network relied on his face to sell advertising time. He was working 16-hour days carrying the weight of a multi-million-dollar production on his adolescent shoulders. He couldn't just be an actor. He had to be a star. He began to chafe against the idol label. In interviews from this period, you can see the frustration bubbling under the surface. He would talk about wanting to direct, wanting to write, wanting to do serious work. He idolized directors like Martin Scorsese. He wanted to be respected, not just adored. He famously dated Tatiana Ali from The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air and they were Hollywood's it couple of the teen scene. But even his relationships felt public, consumed by the voracious appetite of the fan magazines. Then in 1996, Sequest was canceled. Jonathan was 20 years old. He had spent his entire adolescence on a soundstage. He had millions in the bank and a name that everyone knew. He thought the world was his oyster. He didn't realize that in Hollywood, 20 is the age of expiration for a child star. The transition from child star to adult actor is the most dangerous journey in show business. It is a minefield where 99% of actors perish. For Jonathan, the problem wasn't a lack of talent, it was a lack of perception. To the casting directors of the late 90s, he was that kid from Sequest. He was the Tiger Beat Boy. He was a relic of a bygone era of innocence. As the 90s bled into the 2000s, cinema changed again. The rise of indie films and gritty realism meant directors wanted actors with edge. They wanted the next Brad Pitt or the next Johnny Depp. Jonathan Brandis, with his soft features and polite demeanor, looked too TV. He looked too clean. He auditioned relentlessly. He tried to grow a beard. He tried to take darker roles. He starred in independent films like Outside Providence, 1999, delivering a solid, mature performance. But the phone didn't ring like it used to. He watched as his peers, actors he used to beat out for roles, surpassed him. He watched Leonardo DiCaprio, who had once been his contemporary, become the biggest star on the planet with Titanic. He watched as the industry that had built him up began to ghost him. There is a specific kind of psychological torture in being formerly famous. It is worse than never being famous at all. To have tasted the nectar of adoration, to have been the center of the universe, and then to be suddenly invisible, it destroys the ego. You start to question your own existence. If I am not famous, who am I? Jonathan didn't turn to heroin like River. He turned to the bottle. Friends noticed he was drinking more. He became heavier. The sparkle in his blue eyes began to dim, replaced by a bewildered sadness. He couldn't understand what he had done wrong. He had followed the rules. He had been a good boy. Why was he being punished? By 2002, Jonathan Brandis was desperate. He needed a win. He needed a role that would shatter the teen idol image once and for all and reintroduce him to the world as a serious adult actor. Then, the miracle happened. He was cast in Heart's War. This was not a B-movie. This was a major studio production, a World War II epic, starring Bruce Willis and rising star Colin Farrell. It was a serious, gritty prestige film. Jonathan was cast as Louis P. Wakely. It was a supporting role, but a significant one. He saw this as his River Phoenix in My Own Private Idaho moment. This was his chance to show the world his range. Jonathan poured his soul into Heart's War. He treated it like the most important work of his life. He lost weight for the role. He studied the history. He gave everything he had on set in Prague. He called his parents, his friends, his old Sequest castmates, telling them with breathless excitement, "Wait until you see this. I'm back. This is going to change everything." He truly believed that Heart's War was his resurrection. The film was released in February 2002. Jonathan invited his friends and family to the premiere/screenings. He sat in the theater waiting for his moment. But as the film unspooled, his heart began to hammer in his chest. Scene after scene, sequence after sequence. He wasn't there. The editor's blade had been ruthless. In the final cut of the movie, Jonathan Brandis, the former Prince of Hollywood, had been reduced to a glorified extra. His dialogue was slashed. His key emotional scenes were left on the cutting room floor to improve the pacing for Bruce Willis and Colin Farrell. When the credits rolled, Jonathan was devastated. He was humiliated. Imagine the shame. You have told everyone you know that you are starring in a movie with Bruce Willis. You have pinned your entire self-worth on this comeback, and then you are erased. To the producers, it was just a business decision. The movie ran too long, and his subplot wasn't essential to the action. To Jonathan Brandis, it was a message. You do not matter. The failure of Hart's War to relaunch his career broke him. It was the final straw. He told friends, "I'm not an actor anymore. I don't have a career." Los Angeles. The city that had once plastered his face on billboards now seemed to look right through him. Jonathan was 27 years old. In the real world, 27 is young. In Hollywood, for a former child star, it is geriatric. It is the age of the 27 club. He tried to pivot. He wrote a screenplay. He tried to direct. But the depression was a heavy blanket that he couldn't shake off. He felt like a failure. He felt like a joke, a has-been at 27. On the evening of November 11th, 2003, Jonathan went out to dinner with friends. According to eyewitness accounts, he seemed fine. Agitated, perhaps, but functioning. This is the terrifying mask of high-functioning depression. He didn't look like a man on the brink of death. He looked like Jonathan Brandis. He returned to his apartment building in the Wilshire neighborhood of Los Angeles. It was a modest place, not a mansion. His friends were with him in the apartment. But around 11:40 p.m., Jonathan slipped away. He went into the hallway on the second floor. We will never know what he was thinking in those final moments. Was he thinking about the 4,000 fan letters? Was he thinking about the scenes cut from Hart's War? Was he thinking about the silence of the phone that used to ring nonstop? Or was he simply tired? Tired of the dance, tired of the expectation, tired of being the forgotten prince. He took a nylon rope, and he hanged himself. He was found by his friends shortly after. They cut him down. They called 911. He was still alive, barely. Paramedics rushed him to Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, the same hospital where River Phoenix had been pronounced dead 10 years earlier. For one agonizing day, Jonathan Brandis clung to life on life support. His parents flew in. They stood by his bedside, looking at the boy who had once been the most beautiful child in America, now broken and unconscious. On November 12, 2003, at 2:45 p.m., the machines were turned off. Jonathan Brandis was gone. The reaction to his death was the final, cruelest insult. When River Phoenix died, the world stopped. There were vigils. There were cover stories. When Jonathan Brandis died, the world barely paused. The news cycle was dominated by other things. He was a footnote. People magazine ran a small story. The trade papers mentioned it. But there was no national mourning. There was no outcry against the industry that had chewed him up. His death was treated as an unfortunate, quiet tragedy, the inevitable fade out of a star that had burned too bright, too early. But for those who grew up with him, for the generation that learned to feel empathy through his blue eyes, his death was a profound trauma. It was the moment we realized that being good wasn't enough to save you. Jonathan Brandis did everything Hollywood asked of him. He smiled, he sold the toys, he carried the show. He was polite, he was professional. And Hollywood thanked him by erasing him from the screen and then erasing him from memory. His suicide note did not exist on paper. His suicide note was Hart's War. His suicide note was the silence of a phone that never rang. The system had claimed its second victim. One died of chaos, River. One died of silence, Jonathan. But the machine wasn't done. It was already looking for its next meal. Down in the deep south, in a trailer park in Knoxville, Tennessee, There was a boy with eyes like a wolf and a spirit too wild to be tamed. He was the next river phoenix, they said. He was the natural. His name was Brad Renfro, and his story would be the darkest of them all. If River Phoenix was the industry's saint and Jonathan Brandis was its prince, then Brad Renfro was its orphan. In 1993, while Hollywood was mourning River and manufacturing Jonathan, casting director Molly Finn was on a manhunt. Director Joel Schumacher was preparing to film the adaptation of John Grisham's The Client. The script called for a kid who was street smart, tough, and broken. They auditioned 5,000 professional child actors in Los Angeles and New York. None of them worked. They were too polished. They smelled like acting classes and hairspray. Schumacher didn't want an actor. He wanted a survivor. They found him in a trailer park in Knoxville, Tennessee. Brad Renfro was 10 years old. He lived with his grandmother, Joanne, who worked as a secretary at a church. His father was a factory worker with his own demons. His mother was largely absent, battling addiction. Brad didn't have a resume. He had a rap sheet. He had already been in trouble with the local police for minor offenses. He smoked. He swore. He had seen things no 10-year-old should see. When he walked into the audition room, he didn't read lines. He stared Schumacher down. He had an innate, feral intensity that terrified the casting directors. He was hired on the spot. When The Client was released in 1994, critics were stunned. Brad Renfro held his own against Susan Sarandon and Tommy Lee Jones. He wasn't acting in the traditional sense. He was simply existing on camera, letting his own trauma bleed into the character of Mark Sway. He was hailed as a prodigy. The New York Times called him a natural. But in their desperation to find the next River Phoenix, Hollywood made a fatal error. They confused natural talent with emotional stability. They saw a child with the eyes of a wolf and thought, we can tame him, we can monetize him. They were wrong. You cannot domesticate a wild animal by locking it in a golden cage. The tragedy of Brad Renfro is not that he fell into drugs, it is that he was pushed. By 1995, Brad was a millionaire. He was the star of The Cure, 1995, and Tom and Huck, 1995. But unlike his peers, he had no stage parents hovering over him. His grandmother, whom he loved dearly, was overwhelmed by the machinery of Hollywood. She stayed in Knoxville while Brad was shipped off to film sets in strange cities, often accompanied only by a guardian appointed by the studio, usually a low-level handler whose job was to get him to the set on time, not to raise him. Imagine a 12-year-old boy with a history of trauma suddenly given unlimited cash, no curfew, and access to the VIP rooms of Los Angeles. Brad later admitted in interviews that he was introduced to marijuana and alcohol by crew members on his film sets before he was even a teenager. Why? Because it kept him mellow. A high kid was easier to manage than an angry one. By the time he was cast in Sleepers, 1996, a harrowing film about the abuse of boys in a detention center, Brad was already using harder substances. The irony was sickening. He was playing a victim of abuse on screen while being abused by the negligence of the industry off-screen. There is a story from the set of Sleepers that haunts the production crew to this day. Brad, then 14, would often disappear between takes. When they found him, he would be lethargic, his eyes pinned. But instead of calling a doctor or his family, the assistant directors would splash water on his face, give him coffee, and push him back in front of the camera. As long as he delivered the lines, the machine kept rolling. He was the bad boy of the teen magazines, a label the marketing departments loved. It added edge, it sold tickets. But bad boy was just a marketing euphemism for neglected child. 1998 was the turning point. At 15, Brad gave what many consider his finest performance in Bryan Singer's apt pupil. He played Todd Bowden, a brilliant high school student who becomes obsessed with a Nazi war criminal hiding in his neighborhood, played by Ian McKellen. It was a dark psychological role that required Brad to tap into a deep well of sociopathy and malice. And he was terrifyingly good, but off-screen the darkness was consuming him. During the filming of Apt Pupil, the facade began to crack. He was arrested for possession of cocaine and marijuana. He was 15 years old. The media's reaction was telling. When River Phoenix died, there was shock. When Brad Renfro was arrested, there was a collective shrug. Of course, the tabloids seemed to say, he's the trailer park kid. What did you expect? Classism played a massive role in Brad's destruction. River was seen as a fallen angel. Brad was seen as white trash who got lucky. The industry that had exploited his gritty authenticity now used it to dismiss him. Instead of rehab, he was put back to work. He starred in Bully, 2001, and Ghost World, 2001. Even in the grip of heroin addiction, his talent was undeniable. In Bully, he played Marty Puccio, a hulking, drugged-out murderer. It was almost a documentary of his own soul. He was bloated, sweaty, and vacant. The critics praised his commitment to the role, not realizing they were watching a young man die in real time. By the early 2000s, Brad Renfro had become a tabloid caricature. The defining moment of his public humiliation came in Florida. While filming Bully, Brad and a friend tried to steal a yacht. It was a clumsy, drug-fueled attempt that failed miserably. The mugshot went viral before viral was a term. Brad Renfro, the beautiful boy from The Client, looked like a ghost. His skin was gray, his face covered in sores, his eyes dead. Late-night comedians had a field day. Jay Leno made jokes. Saturday Night Live sketched it. The world laughed at the stupid junkie. Nobody asked where were his parents, where were his agents, who was selling heroin to a minor. Brad retreated. He moved back to Knoxville. He tried to get clean multiple times. He would have periods of sobriety where the old Brad, the funny, intelligent, sensitive kid, would resurface. He spoke about wanting to be a writer, a musician. He wanted to help other kids from the trailer parks. But the addiction, fed by years of industry enabling, was a monster he couldn't slay alone. He was trapped in a loop of arrests, probation violations, and brief, humiliating jail stints. The industry that had made millions off his face now refused to insure him for films. He was unhireable. January 2008. Brad was 25 years old. He had just finished shooting a small role in The Informers, a movie based on Bret Easton Ellis's stories about the vacuousness of 80s Los Angeles. It was a fitting, grim final chapter. Brad had reportedly been clean for a short while. He was living in Los Angeles again, trying to mount a comeback. But the demons were patient. On the night of January 14th, 2008, Brad was with friends. There was partying. There was heroin. It wasn't a suicide. Brad didn't want to die. He had actually been talking about his future that very week. He had a son in Japan, a fact few knew, that he wanted to support. But heroin doesn't care about your plans. Brad injected a dose that his body, perhaps weakened by previous abuse or lowered tolerance from a period of sobriety, could not handle. He fell asleep in his apartment. The next morning, January 15th, 2008, his girlfriend tried to wake him. He was cold. Brad Renfro was pronounced dead at the scene. On his back, he had a large tattoo that he had gotten years earlier. It simply read, "Fuck all y'all." It was a final message to the world that had used him, abused him, and then laughed at him. If Brad's death was a tragedy, what happened next was a crime. A month after his death, the 81st Academy Awards, the Oscars, were held. It is the biggest night in Hollywood. During the ceremony, there is a segment called In Memoriam, a solemn montage paying tribute to the actors, directors, and industry professionals who died that year. Millions watched. Brad Renfro's fans waited. They waited to see his face, to see a clip from The Client or Apt Pupil. They waited for Hollywood to acknowledge that he had existed. The montage played. Heath Ledger, who had died just a week after Brad, was there. Directors were there. Publicists were there. The music ended. The lights came up. Brad Renfro was not there. The Academy had deliberately cut him. When asked why, the excuses were vague. Time constraints. Editorial choices. But the truth was brutal and simple. Brad Renfro was an embarrassment. He was an overdose. He was a junkie. He didn't fit the glamorous narrative of the Oscars. He was the dirty laundry they wanted to hide. By omitting him, Hollywood sent a chilling message. We will use your youth. We will profit from your trauma. But if you die ugly, we will pretend we never knew you. It was the final act of abandonment. They abandoned him as a child in hotels. They abandoned him to addiction. And finally, they abandoned his memory. River Phoenix, Jonathan Brandis, Brad Renfro, 3 boys, 3 distinct archetypes. The saint, the prince, the orphan. They came from different backgrounds, a cult, a suburb, a trailer park. They had different demons, but they were destroyed by the exact same machine. The 1990s in Hollywood was not a golden era. It was a meat grinder. It was a decade that commodified angst, but refused to treat the mental health issues that caused it. It was a system that demanded vulnerability from its male stars, but punished them when they actually broke. River died because he was forced to be a messiah when he just wanted to be a musician. The pressure of perfection drove him to the only place where he could be messy, the bottom of a spoon. Jonathan died because he was a good soldier. He followed every rule, did every commercial, and was discarded the moment his face matured. He died of a broken heart, strangled by the silence of a phone that stopped ringing. Brad died because he was never given a chance. He was a child thrown into a wolf pit, and when the wolves bit him, the audience cheered for the blood. The machine hasn't stopped. It has only changed shape. Today, the Lost Boys are on TikTok and YouTube, facing the same pressures of instant fame, the same predatory handlers, and the same voracious audience that demands content at the cost of sanity. River, Jonathan, and Brad were not just casualties of their own vices. They were products designed to expire. River was the saint who couldn't save himself. Jonathan was the prince who was exiled. Brad was the orphan who was never adopted. They were not just faces on a magazine cover. They were the sacrificial lambs of the 90s, devoured so that the industry could keep spinning. And as the credits rolled, Hollywood didn't grieve. It just reloaded. The spotlight of the 90s has faded, leaving behind broken angels sinking into eternal darkness. But the list of victims of this ruthless Hollywood machine doesn't end there. If you want to join me in revisiting these dusty files, to hear the silent cries behind the smiles of former idols, please support me by liking and subscribing to the channel. Whose story should the next one be? A forgotten child star or a crushed legend? Leave the name you want me to bring back from the past in the comments. Because only when we remember them will the tragedy truly not be forgotten.